Hey everybody, it's Nick. Kind of a short session this week because it was actually just Travis coming over and handling how he got arrested and what he did as a result of that. So it's actually sort of just a one-on-one thing. So that's why I have it sort of like Session 21, Part A, Part 1. It's just he and I having a conversation as to what he did as a result of being arrested last week. So let's figure out how we got here. When last we left our heroes. So, long story short, the players know of a small to medium scale attack coming on their stronghold by the lizard folk who are gathering an army to them, and they also suspect a more large scale invasion from some far off nation at a bit later date, but not to them specifically, just to the region. And as a result of their actions and choices, it led them back to the city of Volta, where they were meeting a contact at a bar to deliver a letter, and in that process, Travis consumed some magical, mind-altering fungal cake and shot and killed a random person. Of course, guards came and attempted to arrest him and subdue the situation, gather a report from the crowd that had gathered, all of that. And he was compliant as they arrested him, and that's where we sort of picked up this session. He allowed himself to be arrested. He was taken to the prison. He had all of his weapons and armor and items and everything taken and cataloged and stored, which he allowed. Very interesting. I was worried that he would try to fight at some point or like, hey, can we talk about this? And he was pretty compliant for the most part, so that was really interesting. Obviously, his attitude and everything would change how he was treated and interacted with. And then he waited in a holding cell for a few hours, where he was met with an inquisitor, is what I called them, somewhere between a lawyer and an interrogator, a detective. He was just trying to get some facts on the situation and be able to present an honest case to the magister and gather all that information. And so during this process, as I was sort of figuring out what's going to happen to him, I had to figure out the legal system in Volta. Obviously, that's not necessarily something that every DM prepares for every city that they run in, because how often do players get arrested? Turns out quite a lot. But to figure out the legal system, I had to sort of figure out a bit of the history of Volta. What is Volta? What was Volta? And I knew some ideas, but I needed to flesh them out more. So I will share some of that context with you so you know where I'm coming from. So about 15, 20 years ago, Volta was this run-down, low-life pirate and smuggler's port. Very much Tortuga from Pirates of the Caribbean, if you're familiar with that. So smugglers and pirates and women and ale and no law and run down, ramshackle, that whole 9 yards. And until a group of adventurers came to the area and dropped all of their money on this town. Tens of thousands of gold they poured into it, and they built it up and built infrastructure and nice buildings, and they eventually encouraged, bribed wealthy merchants to come and live here and do business, and then built up a tough legal system to push out all the lowlives and pirates and hire their own sort of private militia to defend against them. And over time, they changed this into a rather nice port town. But I figured in their origins, at least, they would have had to have a rather strict and rigid legal system to push out all of the pirates and smugglers they didn't want living there anymore. So this meant that I knew a lot more about how their system would work. They wouldn't just turn the blind eye for somebody who was shot and killed with strange weaponry and then used to come back to life with magic and all kinds of stuff like that. They probably would look into that and address that situation with some severe legal interest. And as for the judge system, or magisters as I was calling them, they would probably be the Lords of Volta, the actual original adventuring party that settled down here. And so I then got to look into a bunch of actual real US penal code sentencing guidelines for various degrees of crimes that Travis may have committed. And so he had it's either second-degree murder or voluntary manslaughter. And so looking at the difference between some of these things and sentencing and coming up with stuff, so ended up he was facing roughly 6 to 12 years in prison and up to a 2,000 gold fine. And so this inquisitor let him know that. It was a really fun scene going back and forth with the inquisitor and trying to get information and, okay, these are the facts of the case, but what's your side of the story? And follow-up questions and trying to ask things in a neutral manner. And I got to look up various interrogation and detective kind of questioning, interview questions, things like that. So it was actually kind of really interesting scene to roleplay. I like to do that kind of thing where I get to sort of stretch my legs a little bit into things I'm not as comfortable or familiar with, because it's really cool to learn stuff. You Google some weird things as a DM, so sentencing guidelines for second-degree murder is definitely in my search history now. But I also knew that because this was a sort of an extreme prison sentence, I knew that it wouldn't be fair, in my opinion, or fun, to just say, okay, you're in prison, roll up a new character, there's nothing you can do about it. And obviously he could try to escape, or his fellow players could try to bust him out, but I figured there should be some other option, a deal on the table that he could accept that would reduce or eliminate his prison sentence, because it was sort of just a fun shenanigans side thing. I didn't want it to derail a whole character and say, you're basically dead now because you're going to spend 9 years, 12 years, 5 years in prison, and you can't do anything about it. That is a dead character, pretty much. I didn't want to do that off of a random roll just from a thing he was eating that he thought would be totally fine in a public place. I didn't think that would be reasonable, and there are other DMs who may decide otherwise. I decided this way. And so I wanted there to be something on the table that he could do, a deal he could make. And so the Inquisitor sort of let him know, hey, by the way, this is the sentencing you're probably facing, but sometimes a Magister can be convinced to reduce or altogether eliminate or dismiss a case if you can perform some sort of a really difficult or dangerous task. I don't think you're capable of that. And Travis was like, actually, I might be capable of that. I'm pretty cool. And he was like, okay, well, it's on the table. So I threw that out there. I seeded the idea that maybe something could be possible to mitigate a sentence based on what Travis is willing to agree to. So sure enough, in the morning, they go to see the Magister. They sort of expedite his case a little bit because he has offered some willingness to complete some sort of a task for a reduced sentence. So Magisters are obviously more interested in that because sometimes they're time-sensitive things. And he is faced with a 9-year sentence in prison and a total of a 700 gold fine. And the Magister is willing to drop the fine entirely if Travis will divulge the nature of the weapons that he used. Remember, Travis is a gunslinger, and guns are pretty new in this setting. Which Travis, unfortunately for him, refuses. Then he also offers Travis the ability to completely eliminate his 9-year sentence if he does a special secret task for the Magister. Magister tells him there's been a secret evil cult-like entity. Maybe it's a thieves or assassins guild, or maybe it's just a group of mercenaries, a band of thugs, but it seems like cultish behavior, so he calls them a cult. There's been a secret cult that has formed in the sewers and catacombs underneath the city of Volta, and every time they send guards down, they don't come back, or if they do, they're like only one of them and they're barely alive, and so it's definitely too difficult for them to want to send force in unless they send in everybody, and that would, raise concerns among the townspeople, and it's kind of new, and they didn't want to do that yet, so he said, hey, would you be willing to, we sort of linked other things, poisoned wells and kidnappings to this cult, would you be willing to basically undertake a Suicide Squad kind of mission, right? Would you go and do this dangerous, crazy thing, and if you succeed, you get your freedom. If you don't, well, you died trying. And that is what he offers to Travis. Travis, of course, accepts this offer. He would rather get to try to do something than die in prison or spend 9 years in prison. So that is what he is accepting from this offer from this Magister. So he's got to go, he's got to find the cult, he's got to destroy the cult, and bring proof of their destruction. And Travis agrees, and he allows the Gesh spell to be placed upon him. It's that 5th level Geas, if you're wondering how it's pronounced. It's Gesh. It's like Irish or Gaelic or Celtic or something like that, but it's not Geese, as I hear a lot of people say it. So he allows the Gesh spell to be placed upon him and to sort of magically compel him to follow through with this task. And then he goes back to the prison and gets all of his items and gear and everything, and they let him go because he will, the Gesh spell will activate its damage or whatever if he attempts to flee. And so now this coming session is going to be Travis trying to reconnect with the party and then convince them to help him go after the cult. I don't think he can succeed against this cult on his own, but with the party, probably they'll be able to defeat this cult if they're smart about it. And so it's him going to try to convince the rest of the party to go after the cult. I think that he will succeed in convincing them. You never know with the party. They could sometimes refuse and say, "Nah, man, you're in this on your own. We're gonna go over here." So hopefully they don't do that, but I don't think they will. But you never know with this group. So that is where we got to this time. So we'll hopefully be fighting some cultists next week. Looking forward to it. Should be a lot of fun to get back in the normal groove. But thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.